What we found rewires everything you thought you knew about the future. One sentence, whispered on a hillside and carried across centuries, just cracked open the way we read our own headlines. Nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. This isn't a proverb. It's a surgical slice through reality. Two fault lines exposed at once. Peoples colliding from within, powers colliding from without. And when we laid that line over our world, the overlay snapped into place with a clarity that steals your breath. Start at the ground level. Think of a father holding keys to a front door that no longer exists. A mother wrapping a child in a blanket on a concrete floor because the house where the crib once stood is now a memory. The United Nations counts more than 120 million people forced from their homes. That isn't a statistic. It's birthdays without candles and diplomas without schools. It's a teenager memorizing the shape of a skyline she may never see again. If nation against nation were merely poetic, the numbers wouldn't feel like names. Then look backward, not to escape, but to verify. Within a single generation of Jesus speaking, Jerusalem was ringed by armies. Food disappeared. Smoke folded into the sky. Stones the disciples admired were pushed off their pedestals. That near-horizon event is history you can't edit. It's the receipt pinned to the wall of time, proving the voice was not guessing. When the first payment clears, you pay attention to the rest of the terms. Now look around at the machinery above your street. Governments arm, sanction, posture. Alliances tighten like fists. Ships shift lanes. Drones redraw risk. Economists flinch when a single choke point coughs. That's kingdom against kingdom in the air we breathe. And while experts argue about labels, ordinary people feel the tremor as prices rise, shelves thin, and news anchors speak in careful tones. All of it lands like a seismograph that suddenly screams ink. The quiet line jumps. The page records what the body feels. You can deny the quake, but you cannot delete the spike. The sentence Jesus spoke is not an ornament. It's an X-ray. Two fractures, one inside societies and one between them, both inflamed. And if this opening shock is unsettling, brace yourself. Because when we unlocked what he meant by nation and what he meant by kingdom, we found a blade so sharp that you may wish you hadn't pressed play. The first reveal is brutal. Jesus wasn't repeating himself. He was drawing a map with two separate scars. Nation against nation isn't about flags fluttering in wind. It's the collision of identities, tribe, tongue, memory, turning inward until a neighbor looks like a threat. Kingdom against kingdom is the visible clash of governments, budgets, doctrines, deployments, pressing outward until a border becomes a fuse. Two different depths, one world trembling at both layers. Watch how the first blade cuts. It begins in the mouth before it reaches the street. Stories are told about us and them. A nickname becomes a slur. A rumor becomes a reason. Fear grows teeth. You can feel the room tilt. In places where grandfathers once traded recipes, now sons trade glances that feel like warnings. This is identity as weapon, nation against nation at the speed of a whisper. Now watch the second blade. Radios in a capital go quiet. A jet drifts near a line someone drew on a map decades ago. A cabinet drafts language about readiness. A shipment doesn't arrive. Oil changes price in the night. Two ships face each other on a lane where neither wants to blink. This is power colliding, kingdom against kingdom. And if it sounds abstract, ask a market vendor why her shelves feel empty on Tuesdays. And then the two blades cross. A local grievance gets sponsors. A faction finds a patron. Street anger gets uniforms. A war of memory becomes a war of maps. You've seen it before even if you didn't have the words for it. The Balkans in the 1990s, where classmates became targets. Rwanda in 1994, where radio waves became triggers. The pattern is not a theory. It's a scar you can trace across faces and years. Here's the picture that refuses to fade. An MRI with two sequences. One scan shows the soft tissue, identity torn and inflamed. The other shows the bone, state power banging into state power. Look at one scan and you'll miss the break. Look at both, and you can no longer pretend. And if holding both images at once feels like too much, remember this. Jesus drew them for our protection, not our panic. Because when we open the lid on the pattern behind these blades, what we saw will either teach you to breathe in a storm or make you reach for the power button in fear of what comes next. The next reveal is a code hidden in plain sight. Jesus calls these upheavals the beginning of birth pains. That isn't poetry, it's survival language. Contractions return. They grow closer. They hit harder. They promise a delivery but refuse to share a minute. The code resets our instincts, so our hope doesn't crack in the quiet and our courage doesn't drown in the noise. Listen to how the code speaks. After a long calm, one siren sounds in the night. It stops. Then another night. 2 sirens. Weeks pass. Then sirens and shouting overlap. And you begin packing a bag you don't tell your kids about. That's the rhythm. Quiet, spike, quiet, spike, until the intervals shrink and the room learns to sleep lightly. This is not fear-mongering. It's a clock you feel in your chest when history breathes too hard. Walk backward through time with the code in your hand. The fall of Jerusalem did not close the book. Decades later, another revolt shook the same ground. Centuries rolled under the feet of empires whose flags are now museum cloth. 2 world wars taught nations to bury sons by the acre, and still weddings were held and gardens were planted, because life insists on stubbornness even when the page turns red. The code doesn't erase joy, it explains why joy becomes fierce. Open the last pages of scripture, and you will hear the same cadence sung in a different key. Peace removed, scarcity spread, death riding not as a metaphor, but as a memory millions have had to live. No chart to solve, no riddle to brag about. Just a compass for days when up and down refuse to stay put. That's the genius of the code. It doesn't trap you in prediction. It trains you for endurance. And look at today through this lens. Conflicts stack, prices quiver, flights reroute, shelves thin, screens shout. Trust thins faster than soup in a camp kitchen. An old man watches the news with the same jaw he clenched in a different decade. A young mother rehearses an exit plan she prays she'll never need. The code is not a cudgel. It's a hand on your shoulder saying, stay awake. All of this raises a terrifyingly practical question. If the code is real, we should see it on the dashboard. Multiple needles should dip at once. Hunger, displacement, arming, fracture, fear. And if those needles have dropped together even once, then we can't pretend we weren't warned. What we found when we checked that dashboard is so stark that you may feel the room grow colder as you hear it. The dashboard doesn't blink, it blares. The number of people shoved from their homes has never been higher, more than 120 million. Imagine the sound of that many doors closing behind people who don't know when they'll hear their own hinges again. A grandmother folds photographs into a plastic bag. A boy holds a bus ticket like a certificate of survival. A girl learns to sleep with shoes on. Food is the next needle. In too many places, dinner depends on whether the road is open or the field wasn't shelled this week. Sometimes hunger is weather. Often it's war with a slower footstep. A child stares into a bowl and pretends to be full because his mother's eyes are already a prayer. You can count calories and charts. You can also count ribs. Both point the same way. Steel sharpens in the background. Budgets for defense swell to records. But that's not the story that reaches a living room. What reaches the room is a price jump on bread, a delay in medicine, a news anchor speaking in the tone you use when you don't want to scare a child. Kingdoms talk in numbers. Families feel it in groceries. The map of violence looks like spilled ink. Conflicts overlap. A civil dispute becomes a proxy war. A local feud gets an imported accent. Men with no flag cross borders with guns while diplomats craft statements that make no one safer. None of this reads like a surprise if you took the two-edged line seriously. It reads like a schedule you wanted to ignore. Syria is a wound the world can see from space. A city block that was once a row of windows is now teeth broken from a jaw. A father teaches a child to walk in a place where floors don't exist anymore. A teacher writes letters on a wall because paper is a luxury. The shockwaves reached far beyond one border, into votes, markets, and living rooms that thought they were insulated by oceans. Here's the part that hurts most. These needles don't fall by accident. They fall together when the two blades cross, when identity becomes a knife and power becomes a hammer. And yet we still haven't opened the worst drawer in the room, because the most dangerous weapon in this prophecy is not a missile or a tank. It's a story told in a kitchen, a rumor repeated in a stairwell, a label glued to a child's name. When we open that drawer, what we found explains why some streets never go quiet again. The next reveal cuts closer to home than most of us can bear. Nation against nation is what happens when identity, our deepest stories of who we are, gets sharpened into a blade. It starts small, almost polite, a joke that isn't funny, a question about who belongs. A map shared online with colors that make neighbors look like invaders. Then one night someone shouts in a stairwell, and the sound doesn't stop echoing for years. Walk through a city at 3 a.m., and you will hear the early stages of this. Doors that used to stay open now have extra locks. Mothers memorize emergency routes in buildings that never had drills. A teenager deletes photos from a phone because a stranger at a checkpoint might have an opinion about a friend's last name. These are not headlines. They're survival habits when identity becomes a test you keep failing no matter what answer you give. History has written this chapter in letters too large to ignore. In one place, a radio told listeners their neighbors were pests, and men with lists turned intersections into courts without mercy. In another, a siege turned classrooms into targets, and names into liabilities you had to hide. In yet another, villages were burned because of a people's name, and families ran until the borders ran out. This is what nation against nation looks like when the page loses patience with euphemisms. The internet didn't invent this blade, but it sharpened it. A whisper now travels at the speed of a screenshot. Lies receive more applause than correction. Anger gets paid in attention. A crowd can assemble faster than help can. A lie told with confidence becomes a tool no siren can dissolve. And the teenager who deleted those photos learns to delete parts of himself to be safe. That's the real casualty. Souls trimmed to fit someone else's story. Now here's the line that makes the room tilt. Identity fear rarely stays inside the walls where it was born. It calls for money, for training, for recognition. It wants a flag to wave and a border to defend. And that's when the second blade arrives. Power hears the noise and decides whether to amplify it or crush it. Either choice can trigger the same outcome: escalation. The street becomes a map, the map becomes a battlefield, and the people caught in between become counts and summaries that say displaced when they mean uprooted from the only life they knew. If this sounds unbearable, it's because it is. But the prophecy doesn't abandon us at the edge of the knife. It forces us to acknowledge the other blade, the one we pretend isn't moving until it's too late. We opened that door and found a room where decisions are made with a vocabulary that can change the fate of a million strangers before breakfast. And what we saw there is so relentless you might prefer the lights off. Kingdom against kingdom is the language of levers, sanctions, treaties, doctrines, deployments. In this room, a pen can be as dangerous as a missile. Lines drawn on a map decades ago become sparks. A ship turns left instead of right. A convoy is told to wait. An ambassador phrases a sentence in a way a rival can't accept. Between those moments, the world either exhales or holds its breath until it hurts. Look at the last century for a tutorial in how quickly things unravel. In one summer, alliances designed to deter disaster turned into rails that carried whole nations into a furnace. In another moment, ships and missiles stared each other down across water that suddenly felt as thin as paper. The miracle then was restraint. The warning now is that restraint is a muscle you can lose if you don't use it. And the chessboard has new pieces. Hospitals can go dark because someone a continent away typed a string of malicious code. Eyes in the sky that guide planes and phones can be blinded in an instant. Systems designed to arrive fast now arrive so fast that the time for thought, real thought, the kind that says, wait, can be measured in heartbeats instead of minutes. Meanwhile, a factory fire in one city or a blocked canal on one map makes rent harder in another world entirely. If you want to know whether this matters to people who have never read a treaty, ask the baker when flour doubles. Ask the diabetic when the pharmacy says come back next week. Ask the teacher when her students come to class hungry, angry, or both. Power colliding with power doesn't stay on a battlefield. It knocks on doors. Here is the image you cannot unsee. A room filled with mousetraps, each balanced with a ping-pong ball. One tremor, one slip, a chain reaction nobody planned, and nobody can stop once it starts. That's deterrence when fear outruns wisdom. We are told that grown-ups are in charge. We are told that cooler heads will prevail. Sometimes they do. Sometimes the floor is so crowded with traps that even the cool head knows the next sneeze is a catastrophe. All of this could seduce you into numbness. That would be a mistake. Jesus didn't give us geopolitics to make us paranoid. He gave us a code so we'd know how to live in a world that refuses to stay quiet. And when we finally listened to that code, the rhythm of the age made sense in a way that won't let you go back to sleep. The beginning of birth pains. If you hear that as poetry, you'll miss the exit. Hear it as training and you'll make it through the night. Contractions return, quiets shorten, spikes sharpen. The point isn't to time the hour. The point is to build a life that can't be knocked down by a headline. Hope turns into a habit. Courage turns into reflex. Watchfulness turns into muscle memory. Picture the room where life begins. A mother squeezes a hand. A monitor ticks. Nurses move with practiced calm that was forged in nights no one wants to remember. The pain isn't a surprise. It's part of the story. And knowing that changes everything. You don't panic when the next wave hits because you expected the wave and you prepared to breathe through it. Jesus is telling us to breathe. That breath has a shape. It looks like choosing truth before the siren, so you can speak it when the siren blares. It looks like building friendships that outlast algorithms, so a rumor can be challenged by a voice you trust. It looks like turning off the noise long enough to hear the small voice that says, "Not every alarm is an emergency, but some are, and you must know the difference." That's how panic loses its grip. If you want proof that this posture works, ask people who have walked through storms without capsizing. They'll talk about anchors, faith, family, habits that seem boring until the floor moves. They'll talk about small acts that keep a soul from fraying, walking at dawn, holding a child, praying a sentence that you can't forget because it's shorter than your fear. They'll talk about endurance not as stubbornness but as love that refuses to let go. The code doesn't promise ease. It promises meaning. It says, don't waste the quiet. Stock the pantry of your soul in summer for a winter that will come. Learn the names of your neighbors before sirens teach you the sound of their footsteps. Decide what you won't trade for safety, your integrity, your compassion, your allegiance, before a salesman arrives with a price list. We stand at the point in the story where the code hands us a manual. It has nothing to do with date charts and everything to do with character. And if you think this is still abstract, the next page will take that objection away. Because Jesus didn't finish with, hold on. He said something so outrageous that it should make you sit up straight. The pressure you fear will become the stage where your purpose is finally unmistakable. What we found there is not motivational. It's a dare. This will be your opportunity to bear witness. Not a slogan, not a poster. An opportunity, precisely in the place you least wanted it. Jesus doesn't tell his people to become escape artists. He tells them to become truth-tellers under pressure. Settle it in your hearts not to rehearse your defense, he says. I will give you words and wisdom your opponents can't answer. It's the promise everyone wants until the moment arrives, and then it's the only promise that matters. What does it look like? In one story, a woman in a courthouse feels her mouth go dry and then hears herself speak with a clarity she didn't know she had. In another, a teenager refuses to pass along a lie that would protect him, and the friend who expected betrayal finds a backbone he can lean on. In yet another, a nurse crosses a bridge because there's a crying she can't ignore. And on the other side of sirens, a life continues that would have stopped. This playbook isn't about theatrics. It's about a quiet ferocity that remembers who it belongs to. Keep your soul light. Prune the addictions that make your heart slow and your eyes dull. Keep your eyes open. Train yourself to recognize the sound of manipulation, the smell of panic. Keep your tongue clean. If your words were a rope, would anyone be able to use them to climb out of a hole? Or would they slip? Keep your knees bent. Pride turns courage into cruelty. Prayer turns courage into love. History refuses to let this sound naive. There were merchants who hid the hunted when the law said don't. There were pastors who turned sanctuaries into beds and bandage stations. There were writers who smuggled letters past censors that are now read by people who don't know the names of their jailers. None of these people called themselves heroes. They called themselves ready. The lighthouse image has become cliché because it's true. Black water, no horizon, no star, and yet a beam that refuses to flicker. Ships turn because something held. That's the playbook. Not noisemakers, but signal keepers. Not celebrities, but saints with dirty hands. And if you're thinking, isn't this all a bit much? Is the prophecy even real? The next proof is the one that closes mouths. Jesus pinned his words to a city and a siege with such precision that denying it isn't skepticism. It's a gamble with your own oxygen. When you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then know its desolation is near. Read that slowly. A city named, a sign described, an outcome declared. Not, someday there will be trouble, a timestamp. Within a single human lifetime of those words, the ring closed. Food ran out. Families cooked leather. Smoke made the sky a ceiling. Stones that felt eternal fell in a sound that still echoes in the ears of the world. You don't have to take this on someone's authority you distrust. People who didn't believe what Jesus believed wrote what they saw. It's there in records that have outlived their authors. The prophecy didn't whisper from a corner. It walked into a courtroom called history and left a testimony that outlasted empires. That is the near horizon, the down payment that makes the rest of the forecast impossible to shrug off. But the tremor didn't stop with a pile of stones. Decades later, a new revolt opened old wounds. Names changed. Borders moved. The ground learned how to shake in ways that make the present tense feel appropriate centuries later. Even now, watch the way headlines tighten when Jerusalem enters the frame. Don't get lost in arguments. Just notice the voltage. The epicenter still matters in rooms where maps decide money and movement. Hold the double exposure up to the light. In the foreground, the image is sharp. Armies, smoke, stones. A city learning that words can weigh more than granite. In the background, the image moves. The age of nations and kingdoms. Identities sharpening and powers colliding. Displacement like a tide. Courage like a stubborn candle. 2 layers, 1 film, 1 fulfilled sign, 1 ongoing story. This is the crossroad where admiration becomes a trap. You can say, "What a fascinating alignment," and miss the point by a mile. The point is not that Jesus nailed a prediction. The point is that he used the truth to call you. When these things begin to happen, he says, lift up your heads. That isn't posture training, it's allegiance training. And in the final scene, the camera turns to your face. Will you keep your eyes down, comfort clutched like a prize, or will you lift your head and live like someone who has a king? This is where the room goes quiet, not because there's nothing left to say, but because the next words must come from you. Straighten up, Jesus says. Lift your heads. Your redemption is drawing near. If the code is true, if the proof is real, then fear doesn't get to write your story. Watchfulness does. Prayer does. Courage does. Not bravado. Bravery with tears still drying on your face. Here is the inventory you cannot delay. What will you not trade for safety? Your honesty, your compassion, your loyalty to the truth when the crowd hires a cheaper word? Decide now. What practices will keep your soul awake when the day feels like a trap? Reading that is more than scrolling. Friends who are more than followers. Meals that turn strangers into neighbors. Sleep that honors a body you'll need for hard days. Look at the people who made it through nights you can barely imagine. They didn't have superpowers. They had decisions. A mother who opened her kitchen when scarcity whispered, "Shut it." A student who took the failing grade because he refused to cheat. A medic who crossed a line of fire because there was a voice on the other side that sounded like his own child. They didn't become different people when the siren wailed. They were already those people. The siren simply revealed it. The hourglass is not interested in arguments. Sand falls whether you are ready or not. Denial doesn't slow it. Anxiety doesn't catch it. Only decision does. And the decision isn't, what day will it end? The decision is, whose words will I trust when the ground moves? It's not a quiz with trick answers. It's a covenant to belong to the one who told you the truth, who walked into pain before asking you to endure any, who broke death so you could lift your head without pretending you aren't scared. So choose. You can mute this and go back to the numbness that costs more than it promises. You can trade your focus for outrage and call it wisdom. You can drift, hoping the next contraction breaks somewhere else. Or you can anchor your life to the King who warned you in love and calls you in power. Lift your head, clean your heart, strengthen your hands. Teach your children to spot the lie and love the broken. Pray for rulers without worshiping them. Sit with people who don't look like you until the word neighbor becomes impossible to twist. Live like hope is a muscle you work every day. The world will shake. That is not in doubt. What is in doubt for one more moment is you. And when the next wave hits, and it will, the only words that will matter are the ones you trusted before the earth began to tremble.